So, very rapidly, the truth about today's climate. And the extraordinary thing about the slides you're going to see now is that you will not have seen most of this in any mainstream news medium at all. And this is just factual data taken straight from the published authorities, but which somehow never finds its way into the media because none of it fits the storyline that we're doomed. So here's the first one. That is the record of global warming over the last 9 years. Now, the pink zone at the top is what the UN predicted should be happening. The strong red line through the jiggly-uppy-downy data, that's known as the least squares linear regression trend. And what that looks to me like is a fairly hefty, and indeed it is, statistically significant rate of fall. We've had 9 years of a global cooling trend since the 1st of January 2001. Since the beginning of the third millennium, there has been global cooling. How many of your mainstream media have mentioned that to any of you? No, I didn't think so. Not.
Andrew Bolt.
Andrew Bolt. Is Andrew Bolt here yet? Let's have a round of applause for Andrew Bolt. Come on. So then we go on to Arctic sea ice, which follows a regular kind of sine wave. It comes and goes with the seasons. There's lots of it during the winter, not so much during the summer. Nothing particularly to worry about in that graph there. In fact, there was a temporary loss of Arctic sea ice at the summer minimum in 2007. That's the left-hand globe there. But then by 2008, it's the purple area, which is the sea ice. That's just the way the computer graphics from the satellite do it. By 2008, half of that missing ice had come back. By 2009, nearly all of it had come back. So we're not looking at a sort of long-term systematic loss of ice in the Arctic. It just comes and goes and fluctuates quite wildly. In Greenland, we've had 11 years in which there has been a thickening of the ice sheet at a rate of 5 centimeters per year between 1993 and 2003 inclusive, found by laser altimetry by Johannesson et al. In a paper of 2005. Now, I was so startled by this result because all the newspapers are telling me that Greenland, all the ice is falling into the sea and it's all over, sea level, we're going to drown the islands, you know. It's just like a biblical plague. In fact, what is actually happening is that the ice is thickening. So I got in touch with the Department of Defense in the US and I said, I want to see pictures of the DEW line radar stations, the early warning radar stations they used to have on the northern scarp of the Greenland shelf. And I said, I want to see pictures when they were in operation 40 years ago and more recently. On the left, 40 years ago. On the right, more recently. And there is an interesting example of one of the most useful instruments known to science, the Mark I eyeball, and it confirms the results that we saw earlier from Johannesson et al. By laser altimetry. There it is. The ice and snow and firn are building up all around these two stations that are photographed here, and you can see how proud of the ice they stood when they were in operation. So, Eurasian snow cover, which Al Gore says is declining, isn't. There is no trend in any of the 5 vital winter months throughout the last 30 or 40 years, according to Rutgers University Snow and Ice Lab. No trend. And in fact, if anything, we've set new records for Northern Hemisphere snow cover. We set a new record, in fact, as recently as 2001, only it got broken in 2007. And it's going to be broken again in 2009 to 10. Antarctic sea ice is actually on the increase over the past 30 years, and it reached a 30-year maximum just 3 weeks after the 30-year sea ice minimum in the Arctic. I bet most of you saw the minimum in the Arctic reported as an evidence of global warming, and I bet that most of you never saw any mention of the Antarctic 30-year sea ice maximum at all. Would I be right? Yes. You're not being told the truth. So here, if you combine the Arctic and Antarctic sea ice, you get a kind of regular heartbeat of the extent of sea ice. There is, if you like, a cardiogram. And if this was your cardiogram, I think you would agree you would be regarded as a very healthy little planet indeed. Hurricanes. Here we see The hurricane record, the intensity and frequency and duration calculated all around the world for hurricanes and tropical cyclones and typhoons. These are things that matter to you here in Australia, particularly in the northern parts. And yet, we now have the lowest hurricane activity worldwide for 30 years. This is by Dr. Ryan Maui, or he's a graduate student there at Florida State University. That's where I got that one from. So, there is today's climate, and the extraordinary thing about it is that there's nothing extraordinary about it at all. It's absolutely ordinary. There's nothing unusual happening. As Ian has rightly said, everything we see is entirely within what we've seen many, many times before. And there is simply no pattern of catastrophe discernible there. Yes, there have been all sorts of tsunamis and earthquakes and floods and droughts and all the things that always happen in a chaotic climate and always have and always will. But no, extreme weather events are not happening more often than they used to do. The worst that can be said is that maybe they're more often reported now because our methods of measurement are better than they used to be. So now we go on to some climate economics. And here I'm going to start by talking about an emissions trading scheme. And I want to hear you, and I want to hear you loud and clear. Do we want an emissions trading scheme? No! That was pretty good, but I don't think it was quite loud enough for them to hear in Canberra. Do we want an emissions trading scheme? No! That they heard in Canberra. Now here's how it works. What we're going to do is this. We're going to look at the global concentration of CO2 as measured by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Now this organization produces some repellently dubious data, but I think on this one they're probably right. CO2 concentration at the moment is around 388 parts per million by volume throughout the atmosphere. Now, if we therefore add, as we are adding, 2 parts per million per year, then we can work out how much global warming we are going to cause each year if we don't stop adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And it is just under 1/40th of a Celsius degree. So that means if we were to shut down the entire global economy for 41 years, we would have achieved the brilliant result of forestalling 1 Celsius degree of temperature increase. That's all, and only then if the UN's wildly exaggerated estimates of the effect of CO2 on temperature are accurate. Now you can imagine if that result is achieved only by shutting down the whole global economy, with all the death and destruction that that would cause, how much less you're going to achieve if you just have an ETS here in Australia. Or are you? Here then is what happens if you have an ETS. We know this because we've already got one in Britain. It's not ours, it's imposed on us by the commissars of the European Union, whom we do not elect, cannot hold to account, cannot question, cannot remove, and cannot replace. We are no longer free. You still have a democracy here. You can still do something about this ETS, and I'm going to recommend what line I think that your Liberal and National parties might take if the Labour Party pushes this one through. You say the 5 magic words which strike fear into the hearts of every ambitious governing politician who thinks that he is parting a monument more enduring than bronze in the shape of a law that he hopes will survive his own time. You just say, and we're going to practice this together, I'll say it first, we will repeal this bill. Go. We will repeal this bill. That's it. So after this meeting, you all write to your pollies, and you say to them that you want them, if they pass this bill, you'll vote them out of office. And if they're in opposition to this bill, you want them to write back to you and say that they will repeal the emissions trading scheme as soon as they get back into office, which, if it is introduced, won't be a very long time away. And here's why. Suppose you set a low enough price for the right to emit a ton of carbon that it doesn't actually stop anybody emitting a ton of carbon, then hey, all you've got is a tax. A very big tax. In fact, if you're not careful, it turns into the biggest tax in history. But you don't achieve any climatic benefit at all because people are still emitting the carbon. So that's no point, is it? If, on the other hand, you charge a high enough price for emitting a ton of carbon that then it actually makes a difference and deters people from emitting tons of carbon, what do they then do? They go somewhere else. They get out of Australia and they take their businesses and your jobs with them, and they set up in China, which I can tell you for free is not going to have an emissions trading scheme, not anytime soon. They set up there, and there, per unit of production, the carbon emissions are going to be higher than they are here, so you have the effect of A, destroying your own jobs, B, destroying the Australian economy, C, destroying the tax base that pays for everything that the Australian government does, and D, you increase the carbon footprint of the planet. Now, how lunatic is that?